One quiet Monday morning at the cafe, a stranger sat across from me and said, "You don't recognize me, do you?" I barely looked up. He set down a file, calmly repeating details no one had mentioned for 35 years, the day my son disappeared the park, the exact time. My chest tightened. I asked, "Who are you?" He looked straight at me. "I am your son." I wanted to believe. I needed to believe. I thought it was a miracle. Until he added one more sentence, and everything I believed in that moment crumbled. "Thank you so much for being here. I'd love to hear from you. Comment below and let me know, what country or city are you watching from? Building this global community matters to me, and your interaction keeps these stories alive. Please note, this narrative contains fictional elements designed for entertainment and learning. Resemblances to specific names or places are unintentional, yet the insights and wisdom remain genuinely helpful. The Monday morning crowd at Cafe Americano was the usual mix of college students hunched over laptops and office workers grabbing their fix before another week began. I sat in my corner booth, the one with the cracked leather seat that nobody else wanted, spreading 3 case files across the table like I'd done every Monday for the past 8 years. Old habits die hard when you've spent 35 years as a private investigator. Even in retirement, I still came here to work cold cases nobody paid me to solve, kept my mind sharp, kept me from thinking too much about the things I couldn't fix. I was halfway through my second cup of black coffee when the man sat down across from me without asking. He was maybe late 30s, wearing a gray overcoat that looked expensive but rumpled like he'd slept in it, dark hair starting to thin at the temples. Clean-shaven, but the kind of tired that sits behind someone's eyes and won't leave no matter how much sleep they get. I'd seen that look before on parents whose kids never came home, on spouses who had hired me to confirm what they already knew. "You don't recognize me, do you?" he said. I glanced up from the Hernandez file, a missing person case from 2003 that had gone cold before I retired. The question threw me. Most people who knew me from the old days called first. "Should I?" I kept my voice-neutral cop flat, an old reflex. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into a leather messenger bag and pulled out a manila folder, the kind lawyers use. His hands shook slightly as he set it on the table between us, carefully avoiding my coffee cup. "My name is Marcus Reeves," he said, "and 35 years ago, you and Rebecca Morgan filed a missing person report for your 3-year-old son, January 18th, 1989, Rittenhouse Square Park, 4:15 in the afternoon." The world tilted. I hadn't heard anyone speak those details out loud in decades. The date was burned into my memory like a brand, but hearing it from this stranger's mouth felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. "Who the hell are you?" I said, though my voice came out rougher than I intended. "I'm your son." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Around us, the espresso machine hissed, and someone laughed too loud at a joke I didn't hear. I stared at this man. Marcus, he'd said his name was, and tried to reconcile what he was saying with 35 years of grief that had settled into my bones like arthritis. "That's not possible," I said finally. "My son is dead, has been for 35 years. "No." Marcus opened the folder with deliberate care like he was handling evidence. "I was taken, sold to a Romanian trafficking ring. I spent 15 years in Bucharest before I was adopted in 2000 by an American couple living in Newark. They gave me the name Marcus Reeves. I've been living in New Jersey ever since." He slid a photograph across the table. It was old, the colors faded the way Polaroids do, edges worn soft from handling. A little boy, maybe 3 years old, sitting on a front stoop with a golden retriever. The dog's tongue was out. The kid was laughing. I knew that picture. I'd taken it myself, summer of 1988, outside our old place on Spruce Street. My hands went cold. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. "It was in the file the adoption agency gave me when I turned 18, along with this." He pushed across a photocopy of an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local couple's son vanishes from Rittenhouse Square." Rebecca's face stared up at me from the grainy photo, her eyes hollow, with the kind of grief that eventually killed her 6 years later. And this. Marcus held out his left hand palm up and pulled back his coat sleeve. There, just below his wrist, was a jagged white scar about 2 inches long. "You remember this?" I did. God help me, I did. He'd been 18 months old, trying to climb onto the kitchen counter to reach the cookie jar. Fell backward onto a broken coffee mug. 10 stitches at Children's Hospital. Rebecca had cried harder than he did. "Could be anyone's scar," I said, but my voice had lost its edge. I was grasping now, and we both knew it. Right side of the left wrist, Marcus said quietly. Shaped like a lightning bolt. Your wife used to joke it made me look like a tiny Harry Potter before Harry Potter existed. That detail wasn't in any police report, wasn't in any newspaper article. Rebecca had said it exactly once to her sister on the phone, maybe a month before everything fell apart. I remembered because I'd been standing in the kitchen doorway, watching her try to turn our son's scar into a story he'd tell someday. A story about being brave. I need you to understand something. Marcus continued leaning forward now. His eyes were hazel, the same shade as Rebecca's. How had I not noticed that immediately I spent 25 years not knowing who I was? The couple who adopted me were good people, but they didn't know my history. All they had was what the agency told them, that I was a Romanian orphan, that my parents had died, that I needed a home. I believed that story until I was 33 years old. Last year I did one of those ancestry DNA tests, for fun. You know, the kind everyone does now? I knew I'd never done one myself. Too many cases involving genetic surprises that tore families apart. The results came back with a match, Marcus said. A close family match. Vincent Morgan, 62 years old, Philadelphia. Former private investigator. I spent 6 months researching you before I worked up the courage to come here. I know what happened in '89. I know my mother. Our mother died in '95. I know you've been looking for me every day since I disappeared. I stopped looking a long time ago. I said, though, it was only half true. You never really stop. You just learn to live around the hole. I know about Buddy, too, Marcus said softly. I froze. What? The golden retriever. He used to sleep under the stairs, right. You got him in '85, and he lived until '92. Mom wrote about him in her journal. The adoption agency gave me some of her belongings when I turned 18, things the traffickers had left behind. I guess they thought a journal wasn't worth anything. My throat closed up. Rebecca's journal. I'd assumed it was lost with everything else. The thought of her words surviving, being passed through the hands of strangers and traffickers and bureaucrats, finally making it to this man who claimed to be my son, it was too much. I need proof, I managed. More than a scar and a photograph and things you could have researched. I need a DNA test, independent lab, chain of custody. I understand. Though Marcus reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card. I already contacted a lab, GeneTech downtown. They do paternity testing. We can go today if you want, right now. I looked at the card, looked at him, at the scar on his wrist and the tired hope in his eyes, at the photograph of my son and my dog and my wife's shadow falling across the stoop. Yeah, I said finally. Okay, let's do it. Marcus nodded, something like relief washing over his face. But then his expression shifted, became more guarded. He reached across the table, almost touched my hand, then pulled back. There's something else you need to know, he said. Something about my grandfather's estate, about money. A trust fund worth... He stopped, swallowed hard, started again. We need to talk about the money, Vincent, because that's why I really came here. The hope I'd been trying not to feel crystallized into something cold and sharp in my chest. Of course, it was always about money. 35 years, and I was still the same fool who wanted to believe people were better than they were. How much? I asked. $140 million, Marcus said, and I can't access it without you. Tony Castellano had been my partner for 12 years before I retired, and in all that time, I'd never seen him look this uncomfortable. We sat in his Buick outside GeneTech Lab's engine, idling, neither of us making a move to get out. The dashboard clock read 2:13 p.m. We were early. You sure about this? Tony asked, not for the first time since he'd picked me up that morning. I stared at the building's glass facade, watching people in white coats move behind the windows like ghosts. No, but I need to know, Tony grunted. He'd spent the night running every database he still had access to, pulling together a profile on Marcus Reeves. What he'd found hadn't done much to settle my nerves. That guy's clean on paper, Tony said, echoing the conversation we'd had over breakfast. No criminal record, address checks out, penthouse in Newark, rents $4,200 a month. He's got an LLC registered in Delaware, something called Reeves Capital Management. But here's the thing, Vince, the financials don't add up. Company shows minimal activity. No major clients I can find. So, where's he getting the money for that penthouse? Maybe he's good at what he does. I said, though, I didn't believe it. Or maybe he's got other income streams. Tony tapped the steering wheel. I'm just saying guy shows up claiming to be your long-lost son the same week he needs access to a $140 million trust fund. That's one hell of a coincidence. Yeah, I said quietly, it is. But then I thought about the scar on his wrist, about Rebecca's journal, which I'd assumed was lost forever, about the way he'd known Buddy used to sleep under the stairs, a detail so specific, so meaningless to anyone outside our family that it felt impossible to fake. Let's just see what the lab says. I told Tony and finally pushed open the car door. Gene Tech's lobby smelled like antiseptic and new carpet. Doctor. Lisa Hartman met us at the reception desk, a woman in her early 40s with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, and the kind of efficient handshake that told you she didn't waste time on small talk. Mr. Morgan, she said. Thank you for choosing our expedited service. I have your results ready. Is this your legal representative? P.I., Tony said before I could answer. I'm here as a witness. She nodded and led us down a hallway to a small conference room with a window overlooking the parking lot. Marcus was already inside, sitting at the far end of the table, with his hands folded in front of him like he was waiting for a job interview. He looked up when we entered, and I saw the same exhaustion in his eyes that I'd seen yesterday at the cafe. Or maybe I was projecting. I hadn't slept worth a damn. Gentlemen, Doctor, Hartman said, opening a folder and laying 2 printed reports on the table. I'll keep this straightforward. We conducted a standard paternity test using buccal swab samples collected yesterday at 1700 hours. The samples were processed under chain of custody protocol to ensure integrity. She slid one of the reports toward me. I didn't look at it yet. I was watching Marcus, who sat perfectly still, except for the slight tremor in his jaw. The genetic markers show a match probability of 99.97%. Dr. Hartman continued. In layman's terms, Mr. Morgan, the test confirms with near absolute certainty that you and Mr. Reeves share a biological parent-child relationship. The room tilted. I heard Tony swear softly under his breath. Heard Dr. Hartman say something about statistical thresholds and how anything above 99% was considered conclusive, but all I could focus on was the number printed on the page in front of me. 99.97%. My son. Not some ghost I'd spent 35 years chasing. Not a memory that had calcified into mythology. He was real. He was sitting 10 feet away from me, and he had Rebecca's eyes, and I had spent more than half my life believing he was dead. Vincent? Marcus's voice cracked. I didn't know if it would really... He stood up and I stood up, and then somehow we were across the table from each other, and he was crying, and I was crying, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd touched another human being who mattered. His shoulders shook under my hands. He smelled like hotel soap and coffee. He was too thin. I'm sorry, I said, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. For doubting him, for not finding him, for 35 years of absence that no amount of grief could justify. I looked for you. I told him the words spilling out before I could stop them. Every day for 6 years. We put up flyers, hired investigators, followed every lead, no matter how insane it sounded. Your mother, she never gave up. Not even when the police did. Not even when I did. Marcus pulled back, wiping his face with the heel of his hand. I know. I read the case files when I was doing the research. I saw the missing person reports, the newspaper articles. I saw what it did to her. That hurt more than I expected. She died in '95, I said. Pills. The coroner called it an accident, but I knew better. She couldn't live with not knowing what happened to you. I'm sorry, Marcus whispered. If I'd known, if I'd remembered, you were 3 years old. I gripped his shoulder, felt bone through the fabric of his coat. None of this was your fault. Behind us, Tony cleared his throat. I'd almost forgotten he was there. When I turned, he was standing by the window, arms crossed, face carefully neutral. Dr. Hartman had already slipped out of the room, giving us privacy. So what now? Tony asked. Marcus stepped back, composing himself with visible effort. I know this is a lot, he said. And I know I dropped the money thing on you yesterday like a bomb. But I need you to understand the trust fund isn't just about me. It's about both of us. Your father set it up in 1988 right before I was taken. It was supposed to provide for his grandchildren, for me. Wait. I held up a hand trying to process. My father set up a trust fund. Walter. Marcus nodded. You didn't know. My father and I weren't exactly close, I said carefully. Walter Kensington Morgan had been a federal prosecutor, the kind of man who saw the world in verdicts and case law. We'd barely spoken in the last decade of his life. He died in 2010, left me his house and some savings, never mentioned a trust fund. That's because the fund was set up specifically for his heirs, Marcus said. It's complicated legal language, but essentially you can't access it directly. Only your biological children can. And only when they turn 35. I stared at him. You're 38. Exactly. Marcus's expression shifted, became harder to read. I've been eligible for 3 years, but there's a problem. The trust requires verification of identity, DNA proof, and consent from the primary beneficiary, that's you, to release the funds early under a provision called a non-judicial settlement agreement. How much did you say it was worth? Tony asked quietly. $140 million, Marcus said, give or take depending on market performance. The numbers still didn't feel real. And you need me to sign something. Yes. Marcus reached into his messenger bag and pulled out another folder, this one thicker. I've already spoken with an estate attorney, Gerald Foster. He's reviewed the trust documents. If you agree to meet with him, we can start the process. It would mean splitting the funds $70 million for me, $70 million for you, unless you want a different arrangement. I looked at Tony. He shook his head slightly, a warning I didn't need. Every instinct I'd honed over 35 years of chasing liars was screaming that this was too neat, too convenient. A son who appears out of nowhere the exact moment he can legally claim a fortune. But the DNA didn't lie. 99.97%. I need time, I said, to think, to process all of this. Marcus nodded, though I saw disappointment flicker across his face. Of course, I understand. But, Vincent, there's something else you should know about the trust. About why your father set it up the way he did. About who might have been involved in my disappearance. My blood went cold. What are you talking about? Your father made enemies, Marcus said quietly. Powerful ones. And I think one of them is the reason I was taken. The law offices of Foster and Associates occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower on Walnut Street, the kind of building where the elevator had mirrors and the lobby smelled like money. I stood outside for a long moment, watching my reflection in the polished doors. Marcus had been specific when he called. This was a family matter, just me and him and the estate attorney. I should have brought Tony anyway. The receptionist directed me to a conference room overlooking the city. Marcus was already there, sitting at a table long enough to seat 12, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my pension. Across from him sat a man in his 50s with silver hair and an expensive tan. Vincent. Marcus stood, offering his hand. This is Gerald Foster. He's been handling my estate matters. Your estate, I noticed, not our family. Mr. Morgan, Foster's handshake was practiced. Please sit. Can I get you coffee? I'm fine. Let's get to it. Foster smiled the way lawyers do when they're about to complicate your life. Your father established the Walter Kensington Morgan Irrevocable Trust in October of 1988, almost 3 years after your son was born. The initial funding was approximately $8 million real estate proceeds and inherited wealth. $8 million in 1988. 37 years of growth. And it's worth, as of last quarter, $141,600,000. Foster slid a document across the table. The trust has been conservatively invested index funds, bonds, commercial real estate in Center City. The number didn't feel real. My father had been a federal prosecutor, not a mogul. We'd lived comfortably, nothing lavish. The idea that he'd been sitting on this wealth and never mentioned it? Why didn't he tell me? Foster exchanged a glance with Marcus. According to his personal notes sealed until after his death, your father wanted to provide for his grandchildren without, quote, enabling Vincent's self-destructive tendency toward martyrdom. That sounded like Walter. We'd fought about money my entire adult life. The fact that he'd hidden a trust fund because he knew I'd reject it was exactly the controlling move I'd expected from him. So, the money's mine when I turn 65, I said. January 2028, 3 years. Correct. Foster pulled out another document thicker. However, there's an alternative. With consent of all parties, we can modify the trust through a non-judicial settlement agreement under Pennsylvania law. It allows us to rewrite the terms without court involvement. I looked at Marcus. And you want to rewrite the terms. I want what's fair, Marcus said carefully. The trust was meant for your grandchildren. I'm the only one. Under the current structure, I get nothing until you die. That could be decades. I'm 38. I've already lost 35 years. I don't want to wait another 30 for what's mine. So, what are you proposing? Foster tapped the thick document. An agreement that splits the assets 70 million to Marcus, immediately 70 million to you. Everyone wins. Except I have to wait 3 years anyway, I said. Why can't Marcus wait 3 years? Marcus's jaw tightened. Because I have opportunities now. Business investments, time-sensitive deals. I've been patient long enough. There it was, the edge beneath the reasonable tone. I'd heard it in interrogation rooms, the sound of someone who'd rehearsed their pitch until they believed it. What kind of opportunities? Private equity, real estate developments in Newark and Jersey City. Marcus leaned forward. Look, I know you don't know me yet. I know you're cautious. But the DNA doesn't lie. I'm your son. This money was meant for me. I'm asking for access to what's already mine. Foster slid the document toward me. 52 pages, single-spaced, dense legalese. This is the proposed agreement? It lays out terms, distribution schedules, tax implications. All it requires is 3 signatures, yours, as trustee, Marcus's, as blood heir, and mine as executor. I flipped through pages, words like decanting spendthrift provisions, fiduciary duty blurred together. I need time to review this. Of course. Foster's smile didn't reach his eyes, though there are tax advantages to executing before end of quarter. If we wait, you're both looking at higher capital gains. I don't care about taxes. I care about understanding what I'm signing. Marcus stood abruptly. This is exactly what he said you'd do. Who? My attorney. He said Vincent Morgan will drag his feet, find excuses, make this harder than it needs to be, because deep down, he still thinks I'm a stranger trying to con him. Are you? I asked quietly. The room went silent. Outside, a siren wailed down Walnut Street. Marcus's expression shifted, hurt then anger. I spent 15 years in hell because someone took me from you. I lost my mother. I lost my childhood. And now, when I finally have a chance to build something, you're going to treat me like a criminal. I'm treating you like someone I met 3 days ago. I said standing. Who showed up with a lawyer and a 52-page document asking me to sign over $70 million. What would you expect me to do? Marcus stared. For a second I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Calculation, maybe. Frustration. Take the documents, Foster said smoothly, stepping between us. Review them with your attorney if you'd like. But I'd encourage you to move quickly. Marcus mentioned financial obligations, deadlines. The longer you wait, the more complicated this becomes. I picked up the document. I'll be in touch. Marcus didn't speak as I walked to the door, but when I glanced back, he was braced against the table, and Gerald Foster was leaning close, whispering something I couldn't hear. The elevator ride down felt endless. I kept thinking about how Marcus had said, "What's already mine," like the money was a prize he'd won, and I was just the obstacle. Tony had been right. Too convenient, too rushed. I needed to read every word of that document, and I needed to find out what Marcus wasn't telling me about why he needed $70 million right now. Marcus called. While I was sitting in my kitchen, staring at the 52-page NJSA document I still hadn't opened. His voice had an edge I hadn't heard before, tight, controlled, like someone trying not to sound desperate. I need to show you something, he said without preamble. About those investment opportunities. Can you come to my place tonight? It's important. I glanced at the clock. 6:45. Tonight? I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent. Please, Vincent. I think seeing the actual business will help you understand why I need access to the trust fund now. Every instinct told me this was a setup, but I was a PI for 35 years, and the best way to understand a liar is to watch them lie in their own space, see what they surround themselves with, what they think projects success. Text me the address, or now I said. 40 minutes later, I stood in the lobby of a high-rise in Newark, texting Tony the address and apartment number. If I don't check in by 9, call me. His response came back immediately. You armed? I touched the .38 snub nose in my ankle holster. Old habit. Yeah. Don't do anything stupid. The elevator to the 17th floor had mirrors and recessed lighting. The hallway smelled like expensive candles and new carpet. Marcus's door was at the end, number 1702, with a security camera aimed at the threshold. He opened before I knocked. Vincent, thanks for coming. He stepped aside, gesturing me in. Can I get you a drink? I've got a decent scotch. I'm good. The penthouse was exactly what I'd expected. floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, leather furniture that looked Italian, and an abstract art on the walls that probably cost more than my car. The kind of place that screamed, "I've made it to anyone walking through the door." Marcus noticed me looking. The view sold me. You can see the Empire State Building from the bedroom. Nice. I said, though, what I was thinking was, how does someone with a failing business afford this? He led me to a glass dining table where a laptop sat open next to a stack of folders. I wanted to show you this in person because I need you to understand this isn't about greed. It's about survival. I sat across from him, keeping my back to the window so I could watch his face in the overhead light. "I'm listening." Marcus opened the top folder, sliding a bound document toward me. The cover page read, "Reeves Capital Management, Q4 2024 Financial Audit. My firm manages private equity investments. We've got 3 major clients right now, combined assets under management of about 90 million. Last quarter, we made a series of moves into commercial real estate properties in Jersey City, Newark, some in Brooklyn. High yield, low risk. Or so we thought." He flipped to a page dense with numbers. 2 of our biggest deals fell through in December. The sellers backed out, took our deposits. We're contractually obligated to cover the shortfall to our clients by end of week, $8,200,000. I scanned the page. The numbers were clean too clean, round figures. No sense, no supporting documentation. When was this audit completed? Yesterday. I had my accountant rush it. What's the firm's name? Marcus blinked. Sorry, the accounting firm. Who signed off on this? He hesitated just a fraction of a second. Bradley and Chen, small firm out of Princeton. I made a mental note. Tony could verify that in 10 minutes. And if you don't cover the $8 million, I lose my clients, my reputation, everything I've built over the last 5 years. Marcus leaned forward, palms flat on the table. I know what you're thinking. Why don't I liquidate assets, get a loan from a bank? I've tried. The banks won't touch me without collateral, and all my collateral is tied up in the deals that fell through. It's a timing issue. I just need a bridge loan, 72 hours. Then the trust fund paperwork clears. I pay you back with interest. Everyone walks away whole. You want me to give you $8 million. I want you to help your son not lose everything. The shift in his tone was subtle, but unmistakable. Less businessman, more wounded child. I'd seen this play 1,000 times, manipulators switching tactics when logic doesn't work. Go for the guilt. Marcus, I'm a retired investigator living on a pension. I don't have $8 million in cash. But you have access to lines of credit, home equity. You could call in favors from people you worked with. No. I pushed the folder back across the table. Even if I could scrape together that kind of money, I wouldn't. Not on 72 hours notice for a business I know nothing about. His jaw tightened. You don't believe me. I didn't say that. You don't have to. I can see it. Marcus stood pacing to the window. The city lights reflected off the glass, turning him into a silhouette. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You look at me, and you see a stranger, a con artist, someone trying to steal from you. I see someone asking me for $8 million 3 days after we met, I said carefully. If you were in my position, what would you do? He turned, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face, not hurt, not anger. Calculation. Like he was running through options, discarding strategies that weren't working. I'd trust the DNA test, he said finally. I'd remember that my son spent 15 years in hell because someone ripped him away from me. I'd ask myself if maybe he deserves the benefit of the doubt. I stood. The DNA says you're my biological son. It doesn't say I owe you $8 million. So that's it. You're just going to walk away. I'm going to go home and think, like I said yesterday. I moved toward the door, watching his reflection in the dark window. His hands were clenched, shoulders rigid. If your business is as solid as you say, it'll survive 72 hours. And if it doesn't, I stopped at the door, hand on the knob. Then I guess we'll both know this was never about building a relationship. It was about the money. The lock clicked when I turned the knob. Marcus didn't say anything as I walked out, but I felt his eyes on my back the whole way to the elevator. I was halfway across the George Washington Bridge when my phone rang. Tony's name lit up the screen. Tell me you didn't give him money, he said. I didn't give him money. What did you find? Reeves Capital LLC, Delaware registration from 2019 like I told you before. But I dug deeper tonight. Called a guy I know at the SEC. Vincent, there's no Reeves Capital Management, no filings, no disclosures, no AUM reports. If this guy's managing 90 million for clients, he's doing it off the books, which means he's doing it illegally. I merged into traffic processing. What about the accounting firm Bradley and Chen Princeton? Doesn't exist. I checked the New Jersey Board of Accountancy. No Bradley, no Chen, no firm by that name registered in the state. The pieces fell into place. The too clean audit, the round numbers, the urgency. He's running a scam. Yeah, Tony said quietly, and you're the mark. I'd been awake since 5, sitting at my kitchen table with the 1989 case file spread in front of me like an autopsy report. 35 years of dead ends, false leads, and unanswered questions. Somewhere in this stack of yellowed police reports and faded witness statements was a thread I'd missed. Something that connected Marcus's kidnapping to the man he'd become. The phone rang at 11. I knew it was him before I looked at the screen. "We need to talk," Marcus said. No greeting, no pretense. "I'm listening. I gave you a chance to do this the easy way. Be a father, help your son, but you've made it clear that's not going to happen." I leaned back in my chair, phone pressed to my ear, and waited. Let him talk. Let him show me who he really was. "So here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued, voice cold and measured. "You're going to sign that NJSA by Monday morning, 9 a.m., Gerald's office. If you don't, I'm filing a petition with the court to force distribution of the trust fund. I've got DNA proof I'm Walter's grandson. I've got legal standing. And I've got a team of lawyers who will tie you up in litigation for the next 5 years." "Go ahead," I said quietly. Silence on the other end. He hadn't expected that. "You think I'm bluffing? I think you're desperate. And desperate people make threats they can't follow through on." I picked up the fake audit report from last night, the one with the non-existent accounting firm. "Bradley and Harrison don't exist, Marcus. Neither does your investment firm. Tony checked. So, whatever story you're spinning, it's built on lies." Another pause. When he spoke again, the businessman veneer was gone completely. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then explain it to me. Tell me why you really need $70 million. Tell me who you owe." "I don't owe anyone anything." But his voice cracked on the last word just slightly. Fear leaking through. "You're the one who owes me. You abandoned me 35 years ago, left me to be sold like property. Your wife gave up and died while I was still alive suffering. And now, when I finally find you, when I finally have a chance to claim what's mine, you treat me like a criminal." "You're not the son I thought you were," I said. "No, I'm the son you made. And you're going to pay for that." The line went dead. I sat there for a long moment staring at the phone. Then I dialed Tony. "He just called," I said when Tony picked up. "Threatened to sue if I don't sign by Monday." Empty threat. Court case would take months, maybe years. He doesn't have that kind of time. I know. Which means whatever he's into, it's got a deadline. I closed the 1989 file, making a decision. I need you to put full surveillance on him, starting now. I want to know where he goes, who he meets, what he's doing when he thinks nobody's watching. You want me to follow him? Yeah, and Tony, be careful. If he's desperate enough to threaten me, he's desperate enough to do something stupid." After we hung up, I went back to the case file, started from the beginning. January 18th, 1989, 4:15 p.m., Rittenhouse Square Park. Rebecca had been watching Marcus on the playground, turned her back for 30 seconds to tie her shoe. When she looked up, he was gone. No screaming, no struggle, just gone. The police had investigated for 6 months, interviewed everyone in the park that day, checked security footage from surrounding buildings, grainy, useless images that showed nothing. They'd suspected stranger abduction, possibly part of a trafficking ring operating out of the Northeast, but never found evidence. The case went cold in July of 1989. Rebecca spent the next 6 years searching. Private investigators, psychics, 12-step groups for parents of missing children. Nothing worked. In 1995, she stopped eating, stopped sleeping. Her doctor prescribed pills for the anxiety. She took too many one night. The coroner ruled it accidental, but I knew better. I'd blame myself, still did. I should have been there that day. Should have told her to stay home, that January was too cold for the playground. Should have done anything different. Now, Marcus was back, and instead of giving me peace, he was trying to take everything I had left. My phone buzzed. Text from Tony tailing, subject from Penthouse, heading south on 21. And I texted back, "Keep me posted." 2 hours later, Tony called. Vincent, you need to see this. What did you find? He went to Port Newark, industrial area near the shipping terminals. Met two guys outside a warehouse on Marsh Street. I got photos. My pulse quickened. What kind of guys? The kind you don't meet in warehouses unless you're in trouble. Expensive coats. Professional? One of them had a bodyguard. I couldn't get close enough to hear what they were saying, but Marcus looked scared. Real scared. Send me the photos. My phone chimed 30 seconds later. 3 images. The first showed Marcus standing next to a black Mercedes talking to a man in his 50s, wearing a camel hair overcoat. The second captured Marcus handing over an envelope. The third, the one that made my blood run cold, showed the older man gripping Marcus's shoulder, leaning in close, saying something that made Marcus's face go pale. You recognize them? Tony asked. No, but I can guess what they are. I zoomed in on the older man's face. Slavic features, cold eyes, the kind of expression you see on men who have done things they don't regret. Eastern European maybe, Albanian, Romanian, somewhere in that neighborhood. You think this is connected to the kidnapping? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. I saved the photos mind already working through the angles. Stay on him. I want to know everywhere he goes, everyone he talks to. And Tony, if these guys are who I think they are, this isn't about a trust fund anymore. This is about survival. His or yours, maybe both. Tony arrived at my place just after 8 on Saturday morning, carrying 2 laptops and a duffel bag full of equipment I didn't recognize. We set up in my basement office, the same room where I'd spent 35 years working cases. The walls still lined with filing cabinets and whiteboards covered in notes from investigations I'd never quite let go. You sure you want to do this? Tony asked, booting up his laptop. What we're about to do is illegal. Federal crime, illegal. If we get caught, we're not getting caught. I pulled up a chair next to him. And I'm not trying to build a court case. I just need to know what we're dealing with. Tony nodded slowly. Okay, then here's how this works. I send him an email that looks like it's from his lawyer. What's his name? Gerald Foster, subject line, urgent legal matter, trust fund, petition, needs immediate attention. Marcus opens it, clicks the link, and a remote access payload installs on his machine. After that, we can see everything. Files, emails, browsing history. Everything. How long will it take to send the email? 2 minutes for him to open it? Tony shrugged. Could be 5 minutes, could be 5 hours. Depends if he's checking email on a Saturday. I thought about Marcus's desperation, the way his voice had cracked when he threatened me yesterday. A man that's scared doesn't take weekends off. Send it, I said. Marcus opened the email at 9:47 a.m. Tony's screen lit up with a notification, remote access established, and suddenly we were looking at Marcus's desktop. Open browser tabs. A Word document titled Trust Fund Strategy 3. File folders labeled Offshore Clients Krasniki. Jackpot, Tony muttered, already navigating to the offshore folder. What we found inside made my blood run cold. 47 separate Excel files, each one representing a bank account in a different jurisdiction. Cyprus, Malta. 3 banks registered in Tirana, Albania. The spreadsheets tracked wire transfers going back to 2019, hundreds of transactions, moving money in intricate patterns designed to obscure the source. Shell companies receiving funds from other shell companies. Transfers broken into amounts just below reporting thresholds. Classic money laundering architecture. Tony pulled up a summary document Marcus had created probably for his own tracking. The numbers were staggering. Total funds processed 2019 to 2024. $312,400,000, commission earned 3. 5%, $10,934,000. Current liabilities, $25 million. Creditor DA, Krasniki, payment deadline, January 22nd, 2025. I stared at that last line. 12 days from now. Who's old Krasniki? Tony asked. The guy from the photos, the one at Port Newark. I pulled up the images on my phone, zoomed in on the older man's face. Albanian, obviously. If Marcus is laundering money for him and now owes him $25 million, then Marcus is a dead man, Tony finished quietly. I opened another file, this one labeled Client Roster. It was a list of shell companies with cryptic names: Adriatic Holdings, LLC, Eagle Summit, Capital, Blue Mountain Investments, each one linked to an Albanian address or contact. The real names were there too, buried in notes sections. Arben Krasnicki, Luan Hoxha, Gent Marku. Names I didn't recognize, but the pattern was clear. These weren't legitimate businessmen. He's been running money for the Albanian mob, I said aloud more to myself than to Tony. For 5 years, $300 million. Tony whistled low. And somewhere along the way, he either skimmed or lost 25 million of their money. I thought about Marcus's desperation, the fake audit, the $8 million demand, the $70 million trust fund grab. It all made sense now. He wasn't trying to build a life. He was trying to save it. Download everything, I said. Every file in that offshore folder. I want copies. Tony's fingers flew across the keyboard. Vincent, if the feds are watching this guy, and they probably are with this kind of operation, they're gonna know we breached his system. I don't care. You should, because if they come knocking, we've got no legal cover, no warrant, no law enforcement authority. We're just two civilians who committed a federal crime. I looked at the screen at the spreadsheet showing $25 million in debt to a man who met Marcus in abandoned warehouses. My son is laundering money for the mafia. He tried to scam me out of $70 million, and in 12 days, if he doesn't pay what he owes, they're going to kill him. I met Tony's eyes. I need to know everything, legal or not. Tony held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, but when this goes sideways, and it will, we never had this conversation. Agreed. By 6 p.m., we had it all. 312 pages of financial records, bank statements, wire transfer receipts. Emails between Marcus and his Albanian contacts written in careful code, but transparent enough once you knew what you were looking at. The picture was clear. Marcus Reeves had spent 5 years as a money launderer for one of the most violent organized crime syndicates on the East Coast. He'd moved hundreds of millions of dollars through a web of offshore accounts, taking his cut along the way. And somewhere in the last year, he'd made a catastrophic mistake, lost a shipment, gambled away funds he was supposed to be holding. I couldn't tell from the records, and now he owed a debt he couldn't pay. The trust fund wasn't about family. It was about survival. I sat back in my chair, exhausted. On the screen in front of me was a photo from Marcus's personal files, him as a child, maybe 4 or 5 years old, standing in front of a gray concrete building. The orphanage in Bucharest, probably, before the adoption, before he became Marcus Reeves. He really had been kidnapped, really had spent 15 years in hell. The DNA didn't lie about that. But somewhere between then and now, he'd become something I didn't recognize, something I couldn't save. My phone rang, unknown number. Vincent Morgan, I answered. Mr. Morgan, this is Special Agent Ray Thompson with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The voice was professional calm, with the kind of practiced neutrality that told me this wasn't a social call. I need to speak with you about your son, Marcus Reeves. Are you available to meet tomorrow? Say 10 a.m. at our field office in Philadelphia. My heart hammered. What's this about? I'd rather discuss it in person. But I can tell you this much. We've been conducting a RICO investigation into an Albanian organized crime syndicate for the past 18 months. Your son is a subject of that investigation. And based on our surveillance, you've had recent contact with him. I closed my eyes. Of course the FBI had been watching. Of course they knew. I'll be there, I said. Good. One more thing, Mr. Morgan. Thompson's voice softened just slightly. Whatever Marcus has told you, whatever he's asked you to do, don't sign anything. Don't give him money. And don't trust him. We'll explain why tomorrow. The line went dead. Before I let the FBI expose the whole plot, let me know, comment 3 if you sympathize with Marcus, or 8 if you think he deserves punishment. I want to hear your opinion. A gentle reminder, the events in this story are partly fabricated for educational and entertainment purposes. If you want to stop following, now is the time. The streets of Philadelphia were empty at 9:30 on a Sunday morning, just the occasional jogger and delivery truck breaking the stillness. I drove past Independence Hall, past the Liberty Bell Pavilion, past all the monuments to justice and truth, and felt like a hypocrite. 24 hours ago, I'd committed a federal crime. Now I was walking into FBI headquarters, hoping they'd overlook that fact long enough to tell me how badly I'd been played. The William J. Green, Jr. Federal building sat at 6th and Arch, all concrete and tinted glass, the kind of architecture designed to make you feel small. I parked in the visitor lot, showed my ID to security, and took the elevator to the 4th floor. Special Agent Ray Thompson was waiting in the lobby. Early 40s, dark suit, FBI credentials, clipped to his belt wedding ring on his left hand, tired eyes that had seen too many bad things and stopped being surprised. Mr. Morgan. He shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who'd been trained to project confidence. Thanks for coming. Follow me. He led me down a corridor lined with photos of former directors into a conference room with no windows and a table large enough for 10 people. A woman was already seated, laptop open, file folders stacked beside her. This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Nadia Patel, Thompson said. She's handling the prosecution side of our investigation. Patel looked up, dark eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mr. Morgan, please sit. I took the chair across from her, feeling like I'd been summoned to the principal's office. Thompson sat at the head of the table, opened a file folder, and got straight to it. We've been running an operation called Silent Ledger for the past 18 months, he said. RICO case targeting an Albanian organized crime syndicate operating out of New Jersey and New York. Drug trafficking, human trafficking, extortion, money laundering, the works. Primary target is a man named Arben Krasniqi. 52 years old, came to the U.S. in 1995, runs everything from a social club in Newark. We've got wiretap authority on 14 subjects, including Krasniqi and his key associates. He slid a surveillance photo across the table. The man from Port Newark expensive coat, cold eyes gripping Marcus's shoulder. That's Krasniqi, Thompson said, and that's your son with him. I stared at the photo. I know. My partner took pictures Friday. Thompson didn't look surprised. We know. We've had Marcus under surveillance since July of 2023. We've also been monitoring his digital communications, which is how we know you accessed his computer yesterday morning. My stomach dropped. Are you here to arrest me? No. Patel spoke for the first time, voice clipped and prosecutorial. We're here to offer you a chance to help us, but first, you need to understand what your son really is. Thompson pulled out another file. This one was thicker, stuffed with financial records. Marcus Reeves has been laundering money for Krasniqi's organization since 2019. Over $300 million moved through offshore accounts in Cyprus, Malta, and Albania. He takes a commission about 3.5%. That's nearly $11 million over 5 years. I know, I said quietly. I saw the records. Then you also know he's $25 million in debt to Krasniqi. What you don't know is why. Loa Patel opened her laptop, turned it toward me. On the screen was a transaction history, highlighted entries showing transfers to casino accounts in Atlantic City and Macau. He gambled it away. Started small in 2022, escalated in 2023. By last summer, he'd lost everything he'd made and dipped into funds he was supposed to be holding for Krasniqi. When Krasniqi found out, he gave Marcus a deadline. Pay back the $25 million by January 22nd or face the consequences. January 22nd, 9 days from now. That's when Marcus found you, Thompson said. Or more accurately, that's when he decided to use you. I looked up. What do you mean? Patel pulled out another document, a 23andMe ancestry report dated April 2022. Marcus submitted a DNA sample to a consumer genetics service 2.5 years ago. The results came back with a close family match, Vincent Morgan, Philadelphia. He started researching you, found out about the 1989 kidnapping, found out about the trust fund your father established, and he built a plan. The room felt like it was shrinking. He knew who I was for 2 years. 2 years and 9 months, Patel corrected. He waited until November of last year to make contact, because that's when the trust fund would be close enough to maturity. You turn 65 in 2028. 3 years away to make the urgency plausible. He crafted the whole narrative, the victim story, the suffering, the family reunion. All of it designed to manipulate you into signing over $70 million. I thought about the way Marcus had cried in the lab, the hug, the way he'd said, "I'm sorry," like he meant it. If the DNA test was real, I said, 99.97%. The biology is real. Thompson agreed. Marcus is your son. The kidnapping in 1989 was real. But the story he told you about what happened afterward, the trafficking, the orphanage, the innocent victim trying to reconnect with his father, that was a lie. Marcus wasn't trafficked. He was taken as part of an organized hit on your family. My blood went cold. What? Thompson pulled out an old file, yellow newspaper clippings from 1985. Your father, Walter Kensington Morgan, was a federal prosecutor. In 1985, he convicted Angelo Battaglia, underboss of an Albanian crime family, on racketeering charges. 25 years in federal prison. The Battaglia family swore revenge. 4 years later, they acted on it. They took your son. I couldn't breathe. They kidnapped Marcus to punish my father. Yes, but instead of killing him, which was the original plan, they kept him. Raised him within the organization. Taught him the business. By the time he was 18, Marcus was working for them. Money laundering mostly. He's good at it. So he's been a criminal his whole life. I said more to myself than to them. Since he was old enough to understand what he was doing, yes. Patel's voice softened just slightly. I know this is hard to hear, but you need to understand the man who sat across from you and cried about being your son. That was a performance. A very good one, but still a performance. He doesn't want a relationship with you. He wants the trust fund, and when he gets it or when he realizes he can't, he'll disappear. Thompson leaned forward. Or he'll end up dead. Because Krasniqi doesn't forgive $25 million debts. I sat there, hands flat on the table, trying to process. Everything I'd believed that Marcus had been stolen, had suffered, had come back to me broken, but real. It was all constructed. A con. The best con, because it had started with a truth I desperately wanted to believe. Why are you telling me this? I asked finally. Because we need your help, Patel said. Marcus won't cooperate with us voluntarily. He's too deep with Krasniqi, too scared of retaliation. But if we can get him to confess on tape, admitting to the money, laundering the offshore accounts, the whole operation, we can leverage that confession to flip him. Make him testify against Krasniqi in exchange for a reduced sentence. And you want me to get that confession, I said. You're the only one he'll talk to openly, Thompson said. He thinks you still believe him. He thinks he can still manipulate you into signing the trust fund papers. If you meet with him, wear a wire, get him talking about the money he owes Krasniqi and the offshore accounts, we can use that. I looked at both of them. And if I say no, then Marcus goes to prison anyway eventually, Patel said. But it'll take longer, more resources, more risk that Krasniqi's people destroy evidence or disappear. And in the meantime, Marcus is a dead man walking. 9 days, Mr. Morgan, that's all he has. Thompson's expression was carefully neutral. We can protect him, if he cooperates. But we need that tape. I thought about Rebecca, about the 6 years she'd spent searching for our son, the hope that had kept her going until it finally killed her, about the DNA test that said this man was hers, was mine. And I thought about the way Marcus had looked at me across that conference table at Gerald Foster's office. What's rightfully mine? Like I was just an obstacle. Will you help us take him down? Patel asked. I didn't answer, couldn't, because somewhere in the wreckage of the last week, I'd lost the ability to tell the difference between justice and revenge. I spent Sunday night sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the same photograph I'd looked at 1,000 times before. Rebecca maybe a year before, she died standing in Rittenhouse Square with a handful of missing person flyers. She was smiling in the picture. Someone had snapped it, without her knowing, probably one of the other parents in the support group, but her eyes were empty. Hollow. The smile didn't reach them anymore. By Monday morning, I still hadn't slept. The 1989 case file was spread in front of me, again pages I'd memorized decades ago, now feeling like artifacts from someone else's life. Police reports, witness statements, the photo of Marcus at 3 years old, the one I'd shown to every stranger, every cop, every investigator who'd listen. The FBI had given me a choice. Help them take down my son or let him die. Except it wasn't really a choice, not when you stripped away everything else. Marcus was a criminal, a liar, a man who'd looked me in the eye and constructed an entire false life to manipulate me. But he was also the reason Rebecca had kept breathing for 6 years after he disappeared. The reason she'd woken up every morning, the reason she'd died. I picked up my phone, put it down, picked it up again. At noon, Tony called. You decide yet? He asked, no preamble. No. You want to talk it through? I rubbed my eyes, felt the exhaustion settling into my bones. What's there to talk through? The FBI wants me to betray my son. If I do, he goes to prison for the rest of his life. If I don't, he's dead in 9 days. 8, Tony corrected quietly. Today's the 13th. Right. 8 days. You want my opinion? Tony asked. No, but I'll take it anyway. Your son biologically, yeah, he's your son. But Vincent, you don't owe him anything. He's been lying to you since the second he sat down at that cafe. Everything he said, everything he showed you, it was all part of a con. The DNA's real, but the person that's not the kid you lost. That kid's been gone for 35 years. I looked at Rebecca's photograph, at the hollowness in her eyes. She never stopped believing he was out there, I said. Even at the end. Even when the cops said he was dead, when the case went cold, when everyone told her to let it go, she knew. And I didn't believe her. I gave up. Tony was quiet for a long moment. You didn't give up. You survived. There's a difference. Is there? Yeah. And I think Rebecca would have wanted you to survive this too. Whatever you decide to help the FBI or not, I'll back you. But don't do it out of guilt for something that happened 35 years ago. Do it because it's the right call now. I don't know what the right call is anymore. Then you're asking the wrong question, Tony said. It's not about right or wrong. It's about what you can live with. Nadia Patel called at 6 p.m. Mr. Morgan, we need an answer. Her voice was clipped professional. The operation timeline is tight. If you agree to wear a wire, we need to start prep tomorrow. Training equipment fitting scenario rehearsal. The meeting with Marcus is scheduled for January 22nd at 10 a.m. Peninsula Hotel, downtown Philadelphia. Public location controlled environment. You want me to meet him the same day Krasnicki's payment is due, I said. That's intentional. Marcus will be at his most desperate, most likely to talk candidly about the debt the offshore accounts the whole operation. We need him to admit on tape that he owes Krasnicki $25 million and that he attempted to defraud you of the trust fund. With that confession, we can flip him. Offer reduced sentencing in exchange for testimony against Krasnicki. And if he won't flip, then he goes to prison for a very long time. Patel paused. But at least he'll be alive. If you don't help us, Mr. Morgan, Marcus Reeves will be dead by the end of next week. Krasnicki doesn't negotiate. He doesn't forgive. $25 million is a death sentence. I closed my eyes, thought about Rebecca finding Marcus in the park that last time, tying her shoe, looking up and seeing him gone. 30 seconds. That's all it took to lose everything. I need to think, I said. You've had 24 hours to think. We need an answer. The line went dead. Ray Thompson called at 7. Vincent, it's Ray. Look, I know Nadia came on strong. That's her job. But I want you to understand something. His voice was quieter than it had been in the FBI office, less official. I've been doing this for 16 years. Organized crime mostly. I've seen what happens to people who owe money to men like Arben Krasnicki. It's not quick. It's not clean. And it's never just the person who owes. It's their family, their friends, anyone who might know where they are. You're saying Marcus is already dead. I'm saying he's got one chance. Cooperate with us. Testify against Krasnicki. Go into witness protection if necessary. We can keep him safe, but only if he gives us something worth protecting him for. And you think he'll do that? I think he will if you ask him to. Ray let that sit for a moment. You were a PI for 35 years. You know how this works. You know when someone's past the point of saving themselves. Marcus is there, but you're not. You can still walk away from this clean. Or you can help us give him a shot at something other than a bullet in the back of the head. I thought about that, about what Marcus had said in Gerald Foster's office. You abandoned me 35 years ago. Now you owe me. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But Rebecca had never abandoned him, not once. Not until her heart gave out from the weight of hoping. If I do this, I said slowly, I need a guarantee. You protect him. After the wire, after he talks, Krasnicki doesn't get to him. Not in jail, not in witness protection, not ever. If Marcus cooperates, we'll protect him, Ray said. You have my word. At 8 p.m., I called Ray back. I'll do it, I said, but I have one condition. Name it. You protect my son. Whatever he's done, whatever he deserves, you keep him alive. That's the deal. Ray didn't hesitate. Deal. Be at the field office tomorrow, 9 a.m. We'll start prep. I hung up and sat in the kitchen for a long time after that, staring at Rebecca's photograph, wondering if she'd forgive me for what I was about to do, wondering if I'd ever forgive myself. But Tony was right. It wasn't about right or wrong anymore. It was about what I could live with. And I couldn't live with letting Marcus die. By 3 in the afternoon, I'd been practicing the same conversation for 6 hours straight, and I still sounded like I was reading someone their Miranda rights. Try it again, Ray said from the corner of the Safe House conference room. And this time, don't ask questions like you're interrogating him. You're his father. You're hurt. You're desperate to understand why he lied to you. Across the table, FBI agent Sarah Mitchell sat with her arms crossed, playing the role of Marcus for what felt like the 100th time. She was good cold defensive, just the right mix of desperation and arrogance that I'd seen in my son. I took a breath, started again. Marcus, I need you to tell me the truth. About the money. About Arben Krasniqi. About why you really came to find me. Sarah leaned back, eyes narrowed. I already told you. I needed help. I needed family. You're the one who's making this complicated. But the offshore accounts, the 300 million, that's enough. Nadia Patel cut me off from her seat by the window laptop, open to a legal pad covered in notes. You're leading him. A defense attorney will tear that apart in court. You can't tell him what you know. You have to let him volunteer it. I rubbed my face, felt the exhaustion settling behind my eyes. I've been doing this for 6 hours. How am I supposed to get him to confess without asking him directly? You let him talk, Ray said, standing up and moving to the table. Watch. He sat down across from Sarah, and his whole demeanor changed. Shoulders slumped, voice quiet, almost broken. I don't understand why you lied to me. I spent 35 years thinking you were dead. Your mother died believing you were dead. And now you're here, and nothing you've told me makes sense. Just please, help me understand. Silence. Sarah still playing. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, the defensive mask cracking just slightly. I needed the money, she said, finally quieter. That's the truth. I'm in trouble, and the trust fund was the only way out. Ray leaned forward, not aggressive, just sad. What kind of trouble? And just like that, the door was open. Sarah kept talking, filling the silence with details, admissions exactly the kind of voluntary confession Nadia needed. Ray stood up, looked at me. You see the difference? You're a father, not a cop. Marcus needs to feel like he's explaining himself to you, not defending himself against an interrogation. I get it, I said. But Ray, I'm not acting. I am hurt. I am desperate to understand. The problem is, I already know the answers. How do I pretend I don't? You don't pretend, Nadia said, closing her laptop. You let your real emotions drive the conversation. The anger, the betrayal, the grief, all of that is authentic. Use it. Just don't tell him what he should say. Let him say it himself. At 4 o'clock, the tech team came in to fit the equipment. The pen camera was smaller than I expected, indistinguishable from the cheap ballpoints I'd carried for 30 years. The FBI technician, a quiet guy in his 20s who looked like he'd never left a lab, demonstrated how it worked. It's a real pen, writes normally, but the camera's in the clip here. He clicked the top. Recording starts, 4 hours of battery, 1080p video. You'll keep it in your vest pocket angled up so we get face shots. Don't fidget with it. Don't click it on and off. Just put it in your pocket and forget about it. The audio transmitter was sewn into a leather belt, the kind I'd worn every day for 20 years. The technician tightened it around my waist, adjusted the small microphone hidden in the buckle. This transmits real-time to our surveillance van. We'll be parked 1 block from the Peninsula Hotel. If the signal cuts out, we abort. Understood. Understood. Ray handed me a small object the size of a quarter edges, smooth, a single button in the center. Panic button. If Marcus gets violent, if you feel unsafe for any reason, you press this. SWAT team breaches in 8 seconds. They'll be staged in the hotel basement and the building next door. You'll never be more than 50 feet from help. I turned the button over in my hand. 8 seconds. That was either a lifetime or no time at all, depending on what Marcus decided to do. What if he checks me for a wire? I asked. He will, Nadia said. That's why you're leaving your phone in the car. Tell him you forgot it. He'll check your pockets, maybe pat you down. The pen looks like a pen. The belt looks like a belt. Unless he's scanning you with a frequency detector, which we don't think he has access to, he won't find anything. And if he does, then you press the panic button, Ray said simply. But Vincent, we've done this 200 times. Criminals expect high-tech surveillance. Phones, smart watches, hidden earpieces. They don't expect a pen and a belt. It's too old school. Too low-tech. I thought about that. About Marcus sitting across from me in Gerald Foster's office checking my phone to make sure I wasn't recording. About the way he'd looked at me at his penthouse searching my face for signs of deception. He's smart, I said. Smarter than you think. He's been trained by people who kill for a living. If I give him any reason to suspect, then don't. Nadia interrupted. You're his father. You're desperate. You're willing to meet him one last time because you want answers. That's your story. Stick to it. At 5 o'clock, we ran the scenario one more time. This time, I didn't sound like a cop. I sounded like a man who'd lost everything and was trying to understand why. Sarah playing Marcus cracked in 4 minutes. Admitted the debt, admitted the scam, admitted she'd known about the trust fund for 2 years and planned the whole thing. When we finished, Nadia nodded. That'll work. Get that on tape and we have enough to flip him. Ray walked me to the door of the safe house. Outside, the January cold was sharp, the kind that cut through your coat and settled in your bones. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., Ray said. Peninsula Hotel main restaurant. We'll have 15 agents inside all undercover. Diners, waitstaff, bartenders. You'll never be alone. But Vincent, he paused, met my eyes. Once you walk into that room, there's no turning back. Marcus will say things you don't want to hear. You'll record him confessing to crimes that'll send him to prison for the rest of his life. And when it's over, he'll know you set him up. He'll hate you for it. I know. Do you? Ray's voice was quiet. Because in my experience, knowing something intellectually and living with it emotionally are two very different things. I thought about Rebecca, about the way she'd looked at Marcus's photo every night before bed, like if she stared hard enough she could will him back into existence. About the 6 years she'd spent hoping, and the 30 years I'd spent regretting that I'd given up. This might be the last real conversation I ever have with my son, I said. Either he goes to prison and never speaks to me again, or Arben Krasniqi's people kill him by the end of the day. Either way, tomorrow is the end. Ray didn't disagree. If it helps, you're doing the right thing, giving him a chance at life even if it's behind bars. That's more than he deserves. Maybe. I pulled my coat tighter against the wind. But it doesn't feel like enough. It never does, Ray said. And then, you ready for this? I looked back at the safe house, at the lights in the windows where Nadia and the tech team were packing up equipment, at the pen camera in my pocket and the belt transmitter around my waist. No, I said. But I'll be there anyway. I couldn't sleep, hadn't really expected to. At 11 p.m. on the night before I was set to betray my son, I sat at the kitchen table with the lights off, staring at a photograph that had been in the same frame for 37 years. Summer of 1988. Rebecca, Marcus, and me on the front steps of our house on Spruce Street. Marcus was maybe 2.5, sitting on Rebecca's lap, holding a popsicle that was melting faster than he could eat it. Rebecca was laughing at something I'd said. I was looking at the camera, but my hand was on her shoulder, and we looked happy. 6 months after that photo was taken, everything ended. It was January 18th, 1989, 4:15 in the afternoon, Rittenhouse Square Park. I wasn't there. I was working a case insurance fraud, something that didn't matter then and matters even less now. Rebecca had taken Marcus to the playground because he'd been cooped up inside all week, and even though it was cold, the sun was out and he needed to burn off energy. She told me later, when the police asked her to walk through it for the 5th time, that she'd been watching him on the slide. He'd gone down 3 times, climbed back up, gone down again. She bent down to tie her shoe. 30 seconds, maybe less. When she looked up, he was gone. No screaming, no struggle, no one saw anything. The park wasn't crowded. It was winter cold. Most families stayed inside, but there were people there. Dog walkers, joggers. Someone should have seen something. No one did. Rebecca called me at 4:30. I was 20 minutes away. By the time I got there, she'd already called the police, already searched every corner of the park, already started asking strangers if they'd seen a little boy in a blue coat with a dog on it. The police treated it like a stranger abduction. Interviewed everyone in the park that day, pulled security footage from buildings around the square, grainy, useless, showed nothing. They worked the case hard for 6 months. Then it went cold. Rebecca never stopped. She printed flyers, went to support groups for parents of missing children, hired private investigators when we couldn't afford it, talked to psychics, drove to New York to Baltimore to anywhere someone reported seeing a child who might be Marcus. I gave up in 1995, told myself he was gone, told myself we had to move on or the grief would kill us. I was right about the second part. Rebecca died in August of that year. The coroner called it an accidental overdose. She'd been prescribed pills for anxiety, took too many one night. I found her in our bedroom still holding the photo from 1988. There was no note. I never knew if it was an accident or if she'd just decided she couldn't do another day without knowing what happened to him. She wasn't taken with Marcus. People get that wrong sometimes when I've told the story over the years. She was there that day watching him play, doing what any mother does on a January afternoon. Turned her back for 30 seconds. When she looked up, he was gone. She lived 6 more years searching for him. Then the grief killed her. I pulled out the 1989 case file, again spreading the pages across the table, the way I had 1,000 times before. Police reports, witness statements, photos of the park, the flyer Rebecca had made with Marcus's picture and our phone number, and buried in the middle, on page 47 of a 52-page report, a detail I'd overlooked for 35 years. Witness dog walker male 60s reported seeing black Mercedes sedan, older model parked on Walnut Street, adjacent to Park 4 to 4, 20 p.m. Partial plate, foreign registration, possibly Albanian, vehicle left scene, 4:22 p.m. direction, westbound, Albanian. I sat back, the pieces falling into place. The FBI had told me Marcus's kidnapping was ordered by Angelo Battaglia, the Albanian mob boss my father had convicted in 1985. Revenge for putting Battaglia away for 25 years. I'd heard the story, understood it intellectually, but I hadn't connected it to this, to the black Mercedes, to the fact that someone had been watching the park waiting for the right moment. It wasn't random, it was never random. Someone had targeted my family, watched us, waited until Rebecca was alone with Marcus, took him as payment for what my father had done, and I'd missed it. For 35 years, the evidence had been sitting in a police report I'd read 100 times, and I'd never seen it. I wondered if my father had known, if Walter had suspected the Battaglias might come after his family and never warned us, if he'd set up that trust fund in 1988 because he knew something was coming. The anger I felt toward him, toward a man who'd been dead for 15 years, surprised me with its intensity. I pulled out a piece of paper and started writing. I didn't know why exactly. Maybe I needed to say things I'd never get the chance to say out loud. Maybe I just needed to put the thoughts somewhere other than inside my own head. Marcus, I wanted you back for 35 years. Every day. Every case I worked, every missing child I found for other families, I was searching for you. But not like this. Your mother never stopped believing you were alive. She died still hoping. I gave up. That's my failure, not yours. Tomorrow I'm going to betray you. I'm going to record you confessing to crimes that will send you to prison for the rest of your life. I'm doing it because it's the only way to keep you alive. The FBI says if you cooperate, they can protect you. If you don't, Arben Krasnicki's people will kill you by the end of the day. I don't know if there's any part of the boy I lost still inside the man you became. But if there is, I'm sorry. I failed you twice. Once when I let them take you. And now, when I have to let them lock you away, I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me either. I folded the letter, slid it into the drawer where I kept Rebecca's journal and the old case files. Maybe someday I'd give it to him. Maybe not. It didn't matter. Writing it was enough. My phone buzzed on the table. Text from Ray Thompson, 7 a.m. Command van 2 blocks south of Peninsula Hotel. Don't be late, and Vincent get some sleep. You'll need it. I looked at the clock. 11:45. In 7 hours and 15 minutes, I'd put on the wire, walk into that hotel restaurant, and sit across from my son for what might be the last conversation we'd ever have. I thought about Rebecca. About the way she used to sit at this same table looking at Marcus's photo, willing him to come home. About how she'd lived for 6 years on nothing but hope, and how that hope had eventually consumed her. I'd spent 35 years wishing I could have one more chance to find him, to bring him home, to fix what had been broken that day in Rittenhouse Square. Tomorrow, I'd get that chance, and I was going to use it to destroy him. I closed the case file, turned off the kitchen light, and tried to sleep. I didn't succeed. But at some point before dawn, I stopped trying to figure out if what I was doing was right or wrong and started focusing on the only thing that mattered, keeping my son alive. Even if it meant he'd spend the rest of his life hating me for it. That was something I could live with. Barely. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that line from the police report. Black Mercedes sedan, foreign registration, possibly Albanian. At 11:30, I gave up trying. Went to my office, opened my laptop, and started searching. Walter Kensington Morgan Angelo Battaglia, 1985. The first result was a Philadelphia Inquirer article from March 12, 1985. The headline, Federal Prosecutor Breaks Albanian Mob Ring. I clicked through, scanned the text. My father's name appeared in the second paragraph, Assistant U.S. Attorney Walter Kensington Morgan secured a guilty verdict Tuesday against Angelo Battaglia, 45, underboss of the Curti crime family. Battaglia was convicted on 14 counts of racketeering, drug trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. He faces 25 years in federal prison. There was a photo. My father on the courthouse, steps younger than I remembered him, holding a briefcase and looking directly at the camera with the kind of confidence that came from winning. Next to him in handcuffs was Angelo Battaglia, thick-set dark eyes, the expression of a man who didn't forgive. I kept reading. Found another article from 3 days later, smaller, buried on page 7 of the Daily News. Convicted. Mobster threatens prosecutor's family. Angelo Battaglia, recently sentenced to 25 years for racketeering, was escorted from the courtroom Friday after shouting threats at AUSA Walter Morgan. Your bloodline will pay, Battaglia reportedly said. Everything you love will be taken. I sat back from the screen, hands shaking. My father had known. He'd known that Angelo Battaglia wanted revenge, and he'd never told us. I searched deeper, found FBI case files that had been declassified in 2010-15 years after my father retired. One document stood out, an intercepted letter from Angelo Battaglia to his nephew, dated June 1987, 2 years after the trial, 2 years before Marcus was taken. The letter was written in broken English, clearly translated from Albanian Arban. The time is coming. The prosecutor thinks he is safe because I am in prison. He is wrong. His family will learn what it means to take from us. The bloodline must be cut. You will handle this when you are ready. Do not act until I give word. A.B. Arban. Arban Krasniqi. I pulled up another search, Angelo Battaglia family tree. It took 20 minutes and 3 genealogy databases, but I found it. Angelo Battaglia had a sister, Lumnija Battaglia, who married a man named Gent Krasniqi in 1968. They had one son, Arban Krasniqi, born 1973, age 52. The same man Marcus owed $25 million to. The same man who'd given Marcus a death sentence deadline of January 22nd, tomorrow, if he didn't pay. Angelo Battaglia's nephew. This wasn't just organized crime, it was family business, generational revenge. I kept pulling threads, found adoption records cross-referenced with the FBI files I'd downloaded from Marcus's laptop. Pieced together a timeline that made my stomach turn. January 1989. Marcus was taken, not by random traffickers, by Angelo Battaglia's crew acting on orders from prison. The plan had been to kill him. Maximum pain for my father. But Battaglia's wife, a mother herself, intervened. Convinced Angelo to sell Marcus instead. $50,000 to a Romanian trafficking ring. Year 2000, Marcus was adopted by an American couple. Given the name Marcus Reeves. Told he was an orphan whose parents had died in an accident. Year 2005, Arban Krasniqi tracked Marcus down. I didn't know how adoption records, DNA databases, Albanian mob networks that stretched across Europe and into the US. Arban approached Marcus when he was 19. Told him part of the truth, that he'd been kidnapped as a child, that his birth family had abandoned him, that the Krasniqi family had saved him. Marcus believed it. Why wouldn't he? He had no memory of me, of Rebecca, of the life he'd had before age 3. Arban became his mentor, his handler, trained him in money laundering offshore accounts, the mechanics of moving cash for criminal enterprises. By 2019, Marcus was good enough to handle $300 million. And then, in 2022, Marcus submitted a DNA test to 23andMe, probably out of curiosity, probably never expecting to find anyone. The results came back Vincent Morgan, Philadelphia. Biological father. That's when Marcus started researching. Found the 1989 kidnapping case. Found my father's obituary from 2010. Found the probate records showing the trust fund $140 million established 1988 distribution at age 65 or with blood heir consent. Marcus realized what he was, the heir to a fortune, the son of a man who hadn't abandoned him, a pawn in a 40-year revenge plot. But he was too deep in the organization to walk away. He owed Arban Krasniqi his life, or so he thought. And when Marcus started losing money, gambling when the debt climbed to $25 million, Arban didn't cut him loose. He gave him a deadline, January 22nd, the same week I turned 62, 3 years before the trust fund matured. It wasn't a coincidence. I sat back from the laptop, the pieces finally assembled. Arben Krasniqi had let Marcus accumulate debt, had given him just enough rope, and then he'd set the trap steal from your father, drain the trust fund, destroy the Morgan family legacy. Or die trying. Either way, Arben won. If Marcus succeeded the trust fund, my father's final act, the thing he'd built to protect his grandchildren, would be gutted. If Marcus failed, Arben would kill him, and I'd lose my son for the second time. The perfect revenge. 40 years in the making. Angelo Battaglia had died in prison in 2015. But his nephew had inherited the vendetta, and Marcus, stolen from us as a child, raised as a weapon deployed against his own family, had no idea he was a pawn in someone else's endgame. I thought about tomorrow, about sitting across from Marcus at the Peninsula Hotel, wearing a wire recording him confessing to crimes that would send him to prison for decades. And I realized Marcus was both victim and perpetrator. He'd been stolen from me, but now he was trying to steal from me. The boy I'd lost was gone. The man who remained was broken, manipulated, trapped in a cycle of violence that started before he was born. I didn't know if I could save him, but I knew one thing: Arben Krasniqi didn't get to win. Not after 35 years. Not after everything he'd taken from my family. Tomorrow I'd get Marcus on tape. The FBI would flip him, protect him, use him to take down Krasniqi's entire operation. And maybe somewhere in the wreckage, I'd find a way to reach the son I'd lost. The clock on my laptop read 2:17 a.m. In less than 5 hours, I'd be sitting in an FBI command van getting wired up for the most important conversation of my life. I closed the laptop, stared at the wall, and finally I understood why my father had set up that trust fund in 1988. He'd known the Battaglias would come for us. He'd tried to protect us the only way he knew how. It hadn't been enough, but tomorrow I'd finish what he started. I'd slept maybe 2 hours, maybe less. By 6 a.m., I was walking into the FBI field office on Arch Street, running on black coffee and adrenaline. Ray Thompson and Nadia Patel were waiting in the same conference room where they'd briefed me 10 days ago. The table was covered with new files, surveillance photos, and a tactical map marked with red pins. "We have new intel," Ray said before I'd even sat down. "Came through last night. Changes the operation." I dropped into a chair, too tired to stand. "What kind of changes?" Nadia opened her laptop, turned it toward me. On the screen was a surveillance photo of a woman I'd seen exactly once at Marcus's penthouse, briefly in the background. Dark hair, mid-30s, the kind of careful prettiness that came from expensive salons and dermatologists. "Lauren Reeves," Nadia said. "Marcus's wife. We flipped her last week." I stared at the photo. "What?" "January 15th, Ray said, pulling out a file. "We approached her at the penthouse while Marcus was out. Gave her 2 options: cooperate with us and get immunity, or go down with her husband on RICO charges. She chose option 1. What did she give you? Everything." Nadia pulled up another screen account, numbers, passwords, encrypted chat logs. Marcus's laptop password, access to his offshore accounts in Cyprus, Malta, and 3 Albanian banks. Meeting schedules with Arben Krasniqi, including today's. She's been feeding us intelligence for a week. I sat back processing. Marcus's own wife had betrayed him, given the FBI everything they needed to destroy him. "Where is she now?" I asked. "Witness protection," Ray said. "As of last night, new identity relocation pending. She'll testify at trial next year, but for now she's off the grid." "Does Marcus know?" "No, and he won't until after today." Nadia closed the laptop. "Lauren filed for divorce 2 days ago, January 20th. The papers haven't been served yet. We're holding them until after the arrests. But Vincent, you need to understand the man you're meeting this morning. He's at his most vulnerable. His wife just walked out on him. His mafia debt is due in hours. He's desperate, isolated, and running out of options." I thought about that. About Marcus sitting in his penthouse, thinking Lauren was still there, still loyal, when in reality, she'd been working with the FBI for a week, planning her escape while he spiraled. It was the kind of betrayal I understood too well. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked. "Operational security," Nadia said flatly. "The fewer people who knew about Lauren, the better. We only briefed you now because it affects today's plan." Ray leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. "Here's how it's going to work. 4 simultaneous operations, all timed for 11 a.m. While you're recording Marcus at the Peninsula Hotel, we hit 3 other locations." He pointed to the tactical map. Red pins marked 4 spots across Philadelphia and New Jersey. Location 1, the Peninsula Hotel. You meet Marcus at 10. By 10:45, we need his confession on tape. At 11, we move in and arrest him. Location 2, Port Newark Warehouse Marsh Street. Arben Krasniqi is meeting with his lieutenants at 11 a.m. to discuss Marcus's debt. We've got a tactical team ready to breach. Krasniqi's 6 of his enforcers and approximately $12 million in cash will be seized. Location 3 JFK Airport. 3 Albanian couriers are scheduled to board a flight to Tirana at 11:30, carrying $8 million in duffel bags. We intercept them at the gate. Location 4, Marcus's penthouse in Newark. Lauren will hand over his laptop, offshore account, USB drives, and anything else in the safe. Full evidence seizure. I looked at the map at the red pins at the carefully coordinated timing. You're using Marcus as bait. We're using the situation, Nadia corrected. Krasniqi thinks Marcus is scrambling to get the money, thinks he's meeting you this morning to finalize the trust fund transfer. He doesn't know Marcus is about to confess everything on tape. By the time Krasniqi realizes what's happening, he'll be in handcuffs. And if Krasniqi's people find out Marcus cooperated, I asked, if they figure out he's the reason you got to Arben, they won't, Ray said, because Arben will be arrested at the exact same time as Marcus. Simultaneous takedown. By the time anyone in the organization realizes what happened, the entire leadership structure will be in federal custody. And after that, I pressed. When Marcus is in prison and word gets out that he talked, Ray's expression didn't change. We'll put him in protective custody. Separate Unit 24/7 guards, no contact with general population. If he fully cooperates, testifies against Krasniqi at trial, we can offer witness protection post-sentencing. Reduced time, new identity when he's released. If he cooperates, I repeated. That's where you come in, Nadia said. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. A checklist typed in bullet points. Required admissions for prosecutable confession 1. I owe Arben Krasniqi $25 million. 2. I plan to steal the trust fund using a fraudulent NJSA agreement. 3. I have been laundering money through offshore accounts since 2019. Get him to say all 3, Nadia said. Clearly, voluntarily, on tape. Without those admissions, we don't have enough to flip him. And if we can't flip him, we can't protect him. I stared at the checklist. 3 sentences, 3 confessions that would send my son to prison for decades. What if he refuses? I asked. What if I get him on tape and he still won't cooperate? Ray and Nadia exchanged a glance. Then he goes to trial, Nadia said. And based on the evidence we have, the offshore accounts, the wire transfers, Lauren's testimony, he's looking at life without parole. No deal, no protection. And Krasniqi's people will get to him eventually, either in prison or after. So he's dead either way, I said quietly. Unless I get him to confess. Unless I convince him to trust me long enough to destroy him. You're not destroying him, Ray said, voice gentler than Nadia's. You're giving him a chance. The only chance he has left. I looked at the checklist again. 25 million. NJSA fraud. Offshore accounts. And I thought about Marcus sitting in his penthouse this morning, not knowing his wife had left him. Not knowing the FBI had already dismantled his life. Not knowing that in 4 hours his father, the man he'd manipulated, lied to, tried to steal from, would be the one to finish it. He's going to hate me, I said. Probably, Ray agreed. But he'll be alive. I folded the checklist, put it in my pocket. When do we move to the command van? 7 a.m. 2 blocks south of the hotel. We'll wire you up, go over the scenario one more time, and position the teams. Ray stood. Vincent, this is going to work, but only if you stay focused. Marcus is desperate. He's vulnerable. Use that. Get him talking. And whatever happens in that room, remember you're not doing this to hurt him. You're doing it to save him. I nodded. Didn't trust myself to speak. Because the truth was, I didn't know anymore if I was saving Marcus or destroying him. Maybe there wasn't a difference. The command van smelled like stale coffee and electronics. I sat on a metal bench bolted to the floor, watching 6 surveillance monitors flicker with feeds from inside the Peninsula Hotel. Ray Thompson stood beside me, one hand on the wall for balance as the van shifted slightly. Outside, I could hear the muffled sounds of Philadelphia traffic horns, bus brakes, someone shouting in Spanish. It was 7:15 in the morning, and I was about to betray my son. A tech agent, young late 20s, the kind of guy who looked like he'd never left a lab, knelt in front of me with the pen camera. Vest pocket, Mr. Morgan, left side angled up. Don't touch it once it's in place. I nodded. He slid the pen into my pocket, adjusted the angle, stepped back. On one of the monitors, I saw myself from a camera feed already installed in the restaurant. The pen was invisible, just a cheap ballpoint sticking out of my pocket like I'd carried for 35 years. Audio next, the tech said, holding up a leather belt. The buckle looked normal, but I knew the transmitter was embedded inside a microphone so small I couldn't see it even when he pointed it out. I stood, let him thread the belt through my pants loops, tighten it. He clipped a small device to the inside of my jacket lining. Panic button, left inside pocket. You feel threatened, you press it. SWAT breaches in 8 seconds. 8 seconds. The same amount of time it had taken Marcus to disappear from Rittenhouse Square Park 35 years ago. At 7:30, I watched the monitors as FBI agents began filtering into the Peninsula Hotel restaurant. They'd been briefed to arrive separately. No groups, no obvious coordination. A couple in their 40s sat at a booth near the corner table where I'd be sitting. A woman with a laptop ordered coffee at the bar. A man in a business suit read the Wall Street Journal by the window. By 8 a.m., 15 agents were positioned. 8 diners, 4 waitstaff, 2 bartenders. One manager walking the floor with an earpiece hidden under his hair. "SWAT's in position," Ray said, watching a different screen that showed the underground parking garage. I could see 8 officers in tactical gear checking weapons, adjusting body armor. They looked young, too young to be holding guns in a hotel basement, waiting to storm a restaurant, if a 62-year-old PI pressed a button. "Vincent?" Ray's voice pulled me back. He sat down on the bench beside me, lowered his voice so the tech agents couldn't hear. "You okay?" I wasn't. My hands were shaking. I'd thrown up twice in the field office bathroom before we'd even left for the van, but I nodded anyway. "Marcus is going to check your phone," Ray said. "We've been over this, but I need to make sure you remember. When he asks, you tell him, 'I left it in the car. I finished. Forgot it this morning. Old age.'" "Right, he'll believe that. You're 62. You're stressed forgetting your phone is normal." Ray glanced at the monitors. "He might pat you down. Let him. The belt looks like a belt. The pen looks like a pen. Unless he's got a frequency scanner, which we know he doesn't, he won't find anything. And if he does, then you press the panic button and this is over in 8 seconds. Ray met my eyes. "But he won't. We've done this 200 times, Vincent. Criminals expect high tech. They don't expect a pen and a belt." I thought about Marcus, about the way he'd looked at me in his penthouse searching my face for deception, about how smart he was, how trained by people who killed for a living. "He's not stupid," I said. "No, but he's desperate, and desperate people make mistakes." Ray stood. "It's 9 o'clock. You should head over. Get settled before he arrives." I stepped out of the van at 9:30. The cold hit me immediately, January in Philadelphia wind cutting through my coat. I crossed the street, walked the 2 blocks to the Peninsula Hotel, and pushed through the revolving doors into the lobby. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, a piano in the corner, someone playing something soft and forgettable. The kind of place Rebecca and I could never afford back when we'd been a family. I walked to the restaurant entrance. The host FBI agent I knew, though. He looked like every other hotel employee, smiled professionally. "Good morning, sir. Table for 1. "Corner booth," I said. "I'm meeting someone." He led me through the restaurant. I didn't look at the other diners, even though I knew most of them were FBI. Didn't glance at the bartenders or the waitstaff. Just followed the host to the corner booth, slid into the seat with my back to the wall. "Coffee?" he asked. "Black." He disappeared. A minute later, a server, also FBI, brought coffee and a menu. I thanked her, set the menu aside, left the coffee untouched, pulled the pen and a small notepad from my pocket, set them on the table like I was preparing to take notes. The pen sat there innocent, a cheap Bic ballpoint black ink, the kind you could buy at any drugstore. Inside the clip, a camera was recording everything. I looked at my watch, 9:50, 10 minutes. I thought about the last time I'd sat across from Marcus, at his penthouse, when I'd refused to give him $8 million and he'd looked at me like I was the enemy, when I'd walked out thinking I'd never see him again. Tomorrow, I'd thought then, I'll expose him. I'll find out what he's hiding and I'll stop him. I hadn't known then that the FBI was already 10 steps ahead, that Marcus's wife had betrayed him, that in less than 2 hours Marcus would be in handcuffs and his entire life would collapse. I hadn't known that I'd be the one to make it happen. At 9:58, I saw him. Marcus walked through the restaurant entrance, scanned the room briefly, and headed straight for my table. He looked terrible, suit-rumpled face, unshaven eyes, red-rimmed like he hadn't slept. He moved with the tense energy of someone running on adrenaline and desperation. He sat down across from me without a word of greeting. "I know what you're thinking," he said, voice low, "but you don't know the whole story." I didn't respond. Waited. Marcus pulled out his phone, set it on the table. "Check my phone. I want you to see I'm not recording this." He pushed it toward me. I glanced at the screen locked, but the gesture was clear. Then he looked at me expectantly. "Your phone," he said. "Where is it?" "In the car," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Forgot it this morning." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You forgot your phone." "I'm 62, Marcus. I forget things." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he gestured at my jacket. "You mind?" I understood. He wanted to pat me down, check for wires. I stood, held my arms out slightly. Marcus leaned across the table, ran his hands quickly over my jacket, felt the pockets. His fingers brushed the panic button sewn into the lining, didn't register it as anything other than a seam. Checked my pants pockets. Found nothing. He sat back down, visibly relaxing. "Okay," he said. "I just needed to be sure." I sat back down, slowly, heart hammering. Picked up the pen, clicked it once, pretended to test it on the notepad. Marcus watched me, then nodded toward the pen. "Old habit, huh?" "PI for 35 years, I said. "Took notes on everything." He believed it. I could see the tension leave his shoulders. And in that moment, I knew the trap had worked. Marcus thought he was in control, thought he'd ensured we were alone, that no one was listening. He had no idea that 15 federal agents were watching from 10 feet away, that every word he said was being recorded, that his wife had already left him, and in 1 hour his entire organization would be under arrest. "So," Marcus said, leaning forward, "let's talk about the trust fund. Why did you lie to me?" The question came out quieter than I'd intended. Marcus looked up from the menu he'd been pretending to read, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe, or fear. "I didn't lie about the DNA, he said carefully. "That's real. 99.97%. But yeah, I lied about everything else." I leaned back against the booth, felt the pen camera shift slightly in my vest pocket. Somewhere in a command van 2 blocks away, Ray Thompson was listening to every word. 15 FBI agents sat within 20 feet of us, pretending to eat breakfast. "The $8 million, I asked. "The trust fund?" Marcus's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the table, trying to steady them. "I owe Arben Krasniqi $25 million. Deadline is today, 5 p.m. If I don't pay, I'm dead." There it was, the first admission. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my voice level, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. "How did you get $25 million in debt?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've been laundering money for them since 2019, over $300 million. I took a cut about 3.5%. That's nearly $11 million over 5 years. He paused, looked down at his hands. "I gambled it away. Atlantic City McCool, online poker. Started small in 2022. By last summer, I'd lost everything I'd made, and I dipped into funds I was supposed to be holding for Krasniqi. When he found out, he gave me until today. Pay it back or face the consequences." I thought about the FBI's raid plan. In less than an hour, Arben Krasniqi would be in handcuffs at a warehouse in Port Newark. But Marcus didn't know that. He thought he had 5 hours to live. "So you found me," I said, "to steal the trust fund?" "Yes." Marcus met my eyes, and I saw something like defiance there. "I did the DNA test in 2022. Found out you were my father. Started researching, found the kidnapping case, found your father's obituary. Found the probate record showing the trust fund $140 million. And you waited 2 years to contact me. I waited until the timing was right. You turned 65 in 2028, 3 years away, close enough to create urgency, far enough that you wouldn't be suspicious of the deadline." He pulled the NJSA document from his messenger bag, the same 52-page agreement Gerald Foster had shown me weeks ago. "I was going to use this to transfer $70 million to me immediately, then drain the rest through the power of attorney clause buried on page 47. You would have signed it, and by the time you realized what you'd done, the money would be gone." "And the story about being trafficked," I asked. "About suffering for 15 years, about wanting to reconnect with your father." Marcus didn't answer for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Some of it was true. I was kidnapped. I was sold. I did spend time in an orphanage in Bucharest, but the part about wanting family, about missing you, he stopped. I wanted it to be true, I really did. But it wasn't. No. I thought about Rebecca, about the way she'd spent 6 years searching for this man, believing he was out there somewhere, waiting to be found. About the way that hope had eventually killed her. "Did you ever care that I'm your father?" I asked. Marcus's composure finally cracked. His eyes filled with tears, and when he spoke, his voice shook. "I wanted to. When I first found out when the DNA test came back and I saw your name, I wanted to feel something. But, Vincent, I was 3 years old when they took me. I don't remember you. I don't remember Mom. I don't remember the house on Spruce Street or the dog or any of it. All I remember is waking up in a van being handed to strangers, being told I was merchandise." A tear ran down his cheek. He wiped it away roughly. I spent 17 years not knowing who I was. And when I finally found out, when I finally had a name and a history and a family, I was already so deep in Krasniki's organization that there was no way out. The trust fund was supposed to be my escape, my chance to pay off the debt and disappear, start over. "But you weren't going to share it with me," I said. "You were going to take it all." "Yes." I looked at him, this man, who had my DNA and Rebecca's eyes, but was a stranger in every way that mattered, and I felt something break inside me. "Your mother died because of you," I said. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I didn't take them back. She spent 6 years searching, never gave up, never stopped hoping. And in the end, the grief killed her. Pills. August 1995. I found her in our bedroom, holding the picture from your 3rd birthday. Marcus closed his eyes. "I know, I read the obituary when I was doing research. I'm sorry. Are you, I don't know." He opened his eyes, looked at me directly. "I'm sorry she died. I'm sorry you lost her. But I can't be sorry for something I had no control over. I was 3 years old, Vincent. I didn't choose to be kidnapped. I didn't choose any of this." "No," I said quietly, "but you chose to lie to me. You chose to try to steal from me. You chose to manipulate my grief for your own gain." Marcus didn't deny it. "What happens now?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I need you to wire $25 million by 3 p.m. It's the only way." He leaned forward, desperate. "Please, Vincent, I know I lied. I know I don't deserve your help. But if I can't pay Krasniqi by 5 p.m., I'm dead. And I don't mean arrested. I mean actually dead." I looked at him, at the fear in his eyes, at the way his hands trembled. And I said the only thing I could say, "I can't do that." Marcus sat back, the last bit of hope draining from his face. "Then I'm dead," he said simply. Before I could respond, I saw movement in my peripheral vision. Ray Thompson walking toward our booth with 6 agents behind him, all of them with their hands near their holsters. Marcus saw them too. He started to turn to stand, and then Ray was there, hand on Marcus's shoulder, voice calm and professional. "Marcus Reeves, you're under arrest for money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit racketeering." Marcus went very still, and then slowly he turned to look at me. "You," he said, voice flat, "you set me up." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. Just sat there with the pen camera still recording in my pocket as Ray pulled Marcus's hands behind his back and cuffed him. "I'm sorry," I finally managed. Marcus didn't respond. Just let the agents pull him out of the booth, read him his Miranda rights, lead him toward the restaurant exit. And I sat there alone in a corner booth, surrounded by FBI agents pretending to be strangers, and wondered if saving my son's life had been worth destroying what was left of our relationship. I didn't have an answer. I sat in the back of the command van, staring at 6 surveillance monitors as Marcus was escorted out of the Peninsula Hotel in handcuffs. On screen 3, I watched 2 FBI agents guide him toward a black SUV parked at the curb. He moved slowly like he was walking through water, and just before they put him in the vehicle, he turned and looked back at the hotel. I don't know what he was looking for. Maybe me. Maybe one last glimpse of the life he'd tried to build on lies. But from where I sat 2 blocks away, all I could see was a stranger being loaded into a car. Ray Thompson stood beside me, one hand braced against the van's wall. 1100 hours, he said into his radio. "All units execute." On the screens, 3 different locations erupted into motion. Port Newark. Screen 1 showed the warehouse from 2 angles: front entrance and rear loading dock. I watched as a 12-person tactical team approached in coordinated silence, body armor, dark against the gray morning. They moved with the kind of precision that came from doing this 100 times before. At exactly 11 a.m., they breached. The front door exploded inward with a battering ram. Flashbangs detonated inside brief white bursts on the grainy footage. Through the chaos, I could see figures moving Arben Krasniqi in the center of the warehouse, surrounded by 6 men, all of them reaching for weapons they wouldn't have time to draw. FBI, on the ground now. Arben lunged for something, a gun in a shoulder holster maybe, but an agent tackled him before his hand even touched the grip. 2 of his enforcers tried to fight back. I watched one get tasered drop like a stone. Another took 3 agents to subdue all of them, rolling across the concrete floor in a tangle of limbs and shouted commands. By 11:08, it was over. 7 men face down in zip ties, duffel bags lined up against the wall, FBI agents photographing stacks of cash. 12 million, Ray said, watching the same feed I was. Plus Ledger's phones, 4 weapons, clean sweep. I didn't respond. On the screen, Arben Krasniqi turned his head, and for just a second, the camera caught his face. Pure rage. The kind that didn't fade when you went to prison. The kind that lasted decades. I thought about Angelo Battaglia rotting in a cell for 25 years, nursing a vendetta that had destroyed my family, and I wondered if Arben would do the same. If 30 years from now, some other Morgan would be sitting in an FBI van watching the revenge play out again. JFK Airport. Screen 2 showed Terminal 4, Gate B-22. 3 men in dark coats stood near the boarding area, each holding a duffel bag. They looked like any other travelers, tired, distracted, checking their phones. At 1100 hours, 8 FBI agents moved in from 3 directions. No weapons drawn, no shouting. Just a quiet circle tightening around 3 men who had nowhere to run. The first courier, Luan Hoxha, according to the file Ray had shown me earlier, put his bag down, slowly, hands visible. The second Gent Marku tried to back away and got 2 agents on him, immediately arms twisted behind his back before he could take 3 steps. The third youngest one, Besnik Kola, just stood there with his hands already up, like he'd been expecting this. TSA agents cleared the area. Passengers were moved to another gate. And within 4 minutes, all 3 men were in custody. Their duffel bags open on a table, stacks of $100 bills, visible even on the grainy security footage. 8 million, Ray said, and split 3 ways to stay under reporting thresholds. Structuring charge alone gets them 10 years. I nodded, but didn't speak. Couldn't. The weight of the last 48 hours was starting to crush me, and all I could do was sit there and watch other people's lives collapse in real time. Marcus's penthouse. Screen 3 showed Lauren Reeves unlocking the door to the Newark apartment and stepping aside as 4 FBI agents entered. I'd only seen her once before, briefly in the background at Marcus's place, but on the screen she looked different, calmer, resolved. She walked to the bedroom, opened a safe I hadn't known existed, and started handing items to the lead agent. Laptop, USB drives, stacks of cash, documents in manila folders, 2 passports with Marcus's photo, but different names. The agent logged everything, had Lauren sign the evidence sheet, and then escorted her back out. The whole process took 15 minutes. No drama, no resistance. Just a woman handing over the pieces of her husband's criminal life and walking away into witness protection. She'll testify, Ray said. Trial's probably a year out, but with her cooperation and the wire recording, we've got this locked. Yeah, I said quietly. Vincent, I know. I didn't look at him. Couldn't take my eyes off the screens. It's over. We won. Justice served. Ray was silent for a moment. Then, it doesn't feel like winning, does it? No. By noon, all 4 operations were complete. 11 people in federal custody. $20 million in cash seized. Evidence that would take months to process fully, but was already enough to dismantle the largest Albanian organized crime operation on the East Coast. I should have felt something. Relief, maybe. Pride. The satisfaction of having done the right thing. Instead, I just felt empty. There's one more thing, Ray said, pulling out a folder. The trust fund. FBI's freezing it for 4 months while we run a full audit. I looked up. Why? Standard procedure in cases involving organized crime. We need to verify that your father's money is clean. No mob ties, no laundering, nothing that compromises the inheritance. It'll take until June, maybe July. But Vincent, he met my eyes. We've already done preliminary checks. Walter's money came from legitimate sources. Shipping investments, real estate, his own savings. It's clean. Okay. Yes, and that's $140 million, Ray said like I hadn't understood. Once the audit clears, it's yours. I don't want it, Ray frowned. What? I don't want the money. I stood up, felt the van sway slightly under my weight. My father hid it from me because he thought I'd refuse it. He was right. And now Marcus is in prison because of it, and my wife is dead, and I'm... My voice cracked. I'm 62 years old, and I just destroyed my son to save his life. What the hell am I supposed to do with $140 million? Ray didn't have an answer. It's over, he said finally. You did the right thing. I thought about Marcus looking back at the hotel as they loaded him into the SUV. Thought about Rebecca holding that photograph the night she died. Thought about 35 years of searching and 6 days of betrayal and 45 minutes in a corner booth that had ended everything. Then why, I asked, does it feel like I just lost him again? Ray didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The legal machinery ground forward with the cold precision I'd come to expect over 35 years as a PEI. But this time, I wasn't watching from the outside. On February 6th, 2025, Marcus Reeves was formally arraigned in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, and the charges filled 3 pages conspiracy to commit money laundering, 18 counts of wire fraud, racketeering conspiracy under 18 U.S.C. Section 1, 1962, D, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. The prosecution's evidence summary ran to 412 pages, and I received a copy via certified mail. I read every word. Count 1 stated that, between January 2019 and January 2025, the defendant knowingly laundered approximately $300 million in proceeds of criminal activity through 47 offshore accounts in Cyprus, Malta, and Albania. Count 2 detailed how the defendant devised a scheme to defraud Vincent Morgan through fraudulent representation of Identity D, NA evidence, and exploitation of a family trust fund valued at $140 million. I didn't attend the arraignment because I couldn't bear to see Marcus standing in that courtroom in shackles, but Ray called me from the courthouse steps and told me Marcus had pleaded not guilty. His voice was flat professional when he added, "Standard procedure, Vincent. The plea deal comes later." I hung up and stared at the phone for 20 minutes, trying to reconcile the image of the 3-year-old boy stolen from Rittenhouse Square with the 38-year-old man now facing life in prison. By mid-March, the pieces of Marcus's civilian life began to fall apart in ways that felt inevitable, yet somehow still shocking. Lauren Reeves filed for divorce on March 12th, citing irreconcilable differences and criminal conduct by respondent. And Ray told me over coffee that she'd been relocated to an undisclosed city under the Federal Witness Security Program. Marcus didn't contest the divorce, and his attorney, a public defender named Michael Ortiz, told the judge his client waived his right to a hearing. I wondered if Marcus felt anything when he signed those papers, or if by then he'd gone numb the way I had after Rebecca died. The way I felt now watching my son's entire existence unravel from a distance while I sat in my office surrounded by 35 years of case files that suddenly meant nothing. The plea offer arrived in April, and Ray forwarded me a redacted copy along with a terse email that read simply, "Thought you should know. Assistant U.S." Attorney Nadia Patel had structured a deal that would allow Marcus to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit money laundering 1 count and wire fraud 5 counts in exchange for the government, dropping the RICO charge and recommending a sentence of 35 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 25 years. 35 years meant Marcus would be 73 when he walked out the same age I'd be in 11 years, and the symmetry of that felt cruel. Nadia's cover letter included a single handwritten line at the bottom. "This is the best offer he'll get. RICO exposure would be life." I called Ray immediately and asked why they'd dropped the RICO charge, and he explained that Lauren's cooperation had given them Arben Krasniqi, the entire Albanian network, and a clear picture of Marcus's role as a money launderer rather than a ringleader. Technically, Marcus was a tool, Ray said, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. A very expensive, very guilty tool, but Krasniqi was the architect. I thought about Angelo Battaglia's 40-year revenge plan, and wondered if Marcus had ever really had a choice, or if he'd been a pawn from the moment those men threw him into the back of that black Mercedes in 1989. Marcus accepted the plea deal on May 9th, and Tony attended the hearing because I still couldn't bring myself to go. He texted me a photo of the courtroom Marcus in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed. Head bowed, and I deleted it immediately because I didn't want that image burned into my memory alongside all the others. The weeks that followed felt like watching water drain slowly from a sink each day, exactly like the one before, until Ray called again on June 4th, with news I'd stopped expecting. The trust fund's been released, he said, and I was sitting in my office going through old case files when the words registered. The forensic audit had concluded that Walter Kensington's money was clean 100% legitimate, earned through a shipping logistics company he'd founded in 1978, with no mafia ties, no laundering, no proceeds of crime. The $140 million was legally mine, and I hung up the phone and walked to the window. Staring out at the Philadelphia skyline, while somewhere in a federal holding cell, Marcus sat waiting for sentencing. I didn't want the money. I wanted my son back. On June 18th, a letter arrived from the Federal Detention Center in Philadelphia, inmate number 08742-048, and the handwriting was careful and controlled, in a way that reminded me of the adoption papers Marcus had shown me back in January. Dad, it began, and that single word hit me harder than anything else in the past 6 months. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I know what I did to you, to Mom's memory, to the man who tried to protect me 35 years ago. I've had a lot of time to think about the kidnapping, about the choices I made, about the fact that I had a father who spent 3 decades looking for me, and I repaid him by trying to steal from him. I can't undo any of it, but I want you to know, I wish it had been different. I wish I'd had the chance to be your son. The letter was signed simply, Marcus, and I read it 4 times before I picked up the phone and called the detention center to schedule a visit. The clerk asked for my relationship to the inmate, and I paused for only a moment before I answered, Father. I sat in the 3rd row of the federal courtroom at 8:55 on Monday morning, June 15th, 2025, watching the bailiff arrange papers on the judge's bench, while my hands gripped the edge of the wooden pew, hard enough to leave marks. Ray sat beside me in silence, and when I glanced at him, he gave me the kind of nod that meant, you don't have to be here, but we both knew I did. At exactly 9 o'clock, the side door opened, and 2 U.S. Marshals led Marcus into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit and leg shackles that rattled with each shuffling step, and I felt something crack open in my chest when I saw how much weight he'd lost in the 5 months since his arrest. Marcus took his place at the defense table next to Michael Ortiz, his hands cuffed in front of him, and he didn't look back at the gallery, even though I knew he could feel me watching. Judge Catherine Brennan entered, and we all stood, and when she instructed us to be seated, the room settled into the kind of heavy silence that precedes every irreversible decision. Nadia Patel rose from the prosecution table and approached the bench with a folder that I knew contained the summary of everything Marcus had done, and her voice was calm and professional when she began to speak. Your Honor, Marcus Reeves laundered $312 million for the Krasniki criminal organization between January 2019 and January 2025, facilitating narcotics trafficking, human smuggling, and racketeering across 4 continents. He established 47 offshore shell companies to disguise the movement of illicit funds, and when his debt to the organization reached $25 million, he attempted to defraud his own biological father, Vincent Morgan, by exploiting a family trust fund valued at $140 million. She paused and looked directly at Marcus when she added, the defendant used his own kidnapping as a child to manipulate the victim's grief and trust. Judge Brennan turned to Marcus and asked if he wished to make a statement before sentencing, and Marcus stood slowly with his attorney's hand on his elbow to steady him. His voice was quiet but clear when he said, Your Honor, I was taken from my father when I was 3 years old. I spent 15 years in circumstances I wouldn't describe to anyone, and I was eventually adopted and brought to this country in 2000. I don't say that to excuse what I did. I don't blame anyone for the choices I made as an adult. I knew what I was doing when I worked for Arben Krasniki, and I knew what I was doing when I tried to steal from my own father. He stopped and took a breath that sounded shaky even from where I sat. I made terrible choices. I hurt people who didn't deserve it. I'm sorry. Then Marcus turned his head slightly toward the gallery, and his eyes found mine across the distance, and I saw in his face the 3-year-old boy from Rittenhouse Square and the 38-year-old man who'd laundered $300 million, and somehow they were the same person, and I didn't know how to reconcile that. Judge Brennan reviewed the plea agreement and confirmed that Marcus understood he was waiving his right to appeal, and then she delivered the sentence with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Marcus Reeves, You are hereby sentenced to 35 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole after 25 years, pursuant to the terms of your plea agreement with the United States Attorney's Office. You will receive credit for 4 months' time, served from January 22nd, 2025 to today's date. You will be remanded immediately to the custody of the U.S. Bureau of Prisons. The gavel came down, and the marshals moved forward to take Marcus by the arms, and in the moment before they turned him toward the door, he looked at me one more time and mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." My vision blurred and I nodded once, just a small movement of my head, and then he was gone. Ray and I stood outside the courthouse 10 minutes later, in the June sunlight, and I watched people walking past on Market Street going about their ordinary lives, while mine had just split cleanly into before and after. "Vincent," Ray said carefully, and I turned to face him. The words came out before I'd fully formed the thought. "I want to visit him, once a month." Ray studied my face for a long moment and then nodded, and I realized that somewhere in the past 5 months, I'd stopped seeing Marcus as the man who'd tried to steal from me and started seeing him as my son, the one I'd lost 36 years ago and somehow found again even if it was too late to save either of us. I stood outside the new office on Walnut Street in mid-November 2025, looking through the glass doors at the Rebecca Morgan Foundation logo stenciled in gold letters, and beyond it to the view of Rittenhouse Square, where I'd lost my son 36 years ago. The foundation had taken 2 months to establish as a 501c3 nonprofit, and I'd allocated $135 million from Walter Kensington's trust fund to capitalize it, keeping $5 million in reserve for reasons I didn't want to examine too closely yet. The mission statement was simple: locate missing children and support survivors of human trafficking. We'd hired 8 investigators, all former FBI, 3 social workers, and 2 case managers, and the office opened on November 18th with enough work to keep us busy for decades. I named it after Rebecca because losing Marcus had killed her as surely as any disease, and if I couldn't bring our son back to her, at least I could make sure other families didn't endure what we had. By December, I'd visited the foundation every day for 3 weeks, reviewing cases and training staff, until Ray called and asked if I'd scheduled that prison visit yet. I hadn't. The truth was, I didn't know if I could face Marcus again after watching him sentenced to 35 years, and every time I thought about driving to Schuylkill, I found a reason to postpone. But on Saturday morning, December 20th, I got in my car at 9 o'clock and drove 90 minutes northwest through the Pennsylvania hills to the Federal Correctional Institution, where my son was spending the first of what would likely be 25 Christmases behind bars. The visiting room was painted institutional beige and smelled like disinfectant, and fear divided down the middle by bulletproof glass with metal stools bolted to the floor on either side. I sat down at 2 p.m. and waited, and when the door opened and Marcus shuffled in, wearing a khaki prison uniform, I barely recognized him. He'd lost maybe 20 pounds since June, and his face had the gaunt, hollow look of someone who wasn't sleeping well. He sat across from me and picked up the telephone receiver on his side of the glass, and I did the same on mine. "You didn't have to come," Marcus said, and his voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "I know." He looked down at his hands for a moment, and then back at me. "I heard about the foundation. Mom would have been proud. I named it after her. Losing you killed her Marcus. I'm sorry for everything." His eyes were red-rimmed, and I wondered if he'd been crying before they brought him in. "I know you are. Do you—" He stopped and swallowed hard. "Do you hate me?" I'd thought about that question every day since January, and I still didn't have a clean answer. "No," I said finally. "I'm angry. I'm hurt. But I don't hate you." Marcus's face crumpled and tears started running down his cheeks, and he pressed his palm against the glass like he wanted to reach through it. "I don't deserve that." "Maybe not, but you're still my son." We sat in silence for a long time, after the Marcus crying quietly, and me watching him and trying to reconcile every version of the person I'd lost and found and lost again. At 3 p.m., a guard tapped Marcus on the shoulder and told him time was up, and he stood slowly and looked at me through the glass. "Will you come back?" I thought about the foundation and the $5 million I'd set aside in a separate trust account with Marcus's name on it, money he wouldn't know about until he was eligible for parole in 25 years' money that would be waiting if he wanted to start over. I thought about Rebecca and the 35 years I'd spent looking for our son and the fact that I'd finally found him in the worst possible way. "I don't know," I said, "but maybe." I walked out of the prison and drove back to Philadelphia through the winter afternoon. And by the time I reached the city limits, I'd made a decision. I'd lost Marcus twice, once to the monsters who took him in 1989, and once to the man he'd become under their influence. But maybe, just maybe, I could help him find his way back. It would take 25 years, and there were no guarantees, but I'd already spent 36 years searching for him. What was another quarter century if it meant giving my son a second chance at the life that had been stolen from both of us? I'm Vincent Morgan, and if there's one thing this family story taught me, it's that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people we love most. Wrapped in DNA, results in childhood photographs. This family betrayal nearly destroyed me, but God had other plans. When I stood in that courtroom watching Marcus sentenced to 35 years, I realized that even in our darkest family story, grace can find a way in. Don't be like me. Don't let 36 years of grief blind you to red flags. Don't mistake blood relation for character. I wanted so desperately to believe Marcus was the 3-year-old boy I lost, that I ignored every warning sign, the urgency, the shell companies, the $8 million demand. Love made me vulnerable, and family betrayal exploited that vulnerability in ways I never imagined possible. Here's what I believe now. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and loving someone doesn't mean excusing their crimes. Marcus is my son, and I will visit him every month for the next 25 years, but I will never pretend that our family story ended the way I hoped it would. The Rebecca Morgan Foundation helps hundreds of families avoid what we endured, and that's the only redemption I can find in this mess, turning our family betrayal into something that protects others. If this family story resonated with you, please leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts. Have you experienced family betrayal? How did you find your way through it? Subscribe to this channel for more real stories about resilience, justice, and the complicated truth about family bonds. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other we're not alone. Thank you for following this journey to the end. Please note, upcoming stories contain fictionalized elements created for educational purposes. If this content isn't right for you, feel free to exit and choose something that better suits your preferences. Your well-being matters.